Okay, now our guest speaker. Tonight's guest speaker is Jacob Skorup. I hope I said that right. He's a research associate for the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. He's a graduate of Grove City College with degrees in history and political science. He also studied economics and religion. While there, he was captain of the Grove City Wrestling and Ultimate Frisbee teams. He was a student fellow of the Center for Vision and Values, the school's research and scholarship think tank. And he's an Illinois native and an avid fan of the Chicago Cubs, the Bears, and the Bulls. Now, there's probably some people here that would be opposed to that, but we understand, Jarrett. It's okay. Besides studying and writing about public policy, he coaches and officiates high school wrestling. He's also a content manager for the Michigan Capital Confidential. His writings have been published in the Wall Street Journal, Fox News, MLive, Detroit Free Press, Detroit News, Orange County Register, the Daily Caller, townhall.com, the National Review, and many newspapers across the country. Currently lives in Midland, Michigan with his wife Karen and his son Grayson. So please join me in welcoming Jarrett.
That's normally more applause than I get when people find out the sports teams that I like, so. Try to get this to work. Thanks for having me. I enjoy coming and speaking to groups, and you seem like you have a good one. Everyone's really involved, and I can tell, you really have everything together with the introduction. So, coming here on my own time and everything, I'll ask as payment. I have a little sheet. This is just a name and email list. But first I'd ask, who's heard of the Mackinac Center? Okay, great, fantastic. Who's heard of Michigan Capital Confidential? So that's kind of our news website. That's what I work for. We have a print publication and newspaper. It goes out every other month, and that's free. And then we also have articles daily that are online. And if you're interested in receiving either of those, the best way is to just have your email. So if you are interested in that, I'll pass this around. If not, don't feel any obligation to do it. So, thank you. I noticed, while we were talking, and one of the things a lot of Tea Party groups get involved in a lot of federal issues, and that was kind of what we discussed, or I was hearing discussed. And those are very important. Those are the big issues, and especially as the federal government's grown, that's been the issues that affect a lot of our lives. But I'm going to bring this back down to some state issues, and one of the reasons for that is, in my opinion, that's really where the Tea Party groups and just regular citizens can be the most effective. So I will talk about some of the stuff that's going on with our state and a little bit specifically in one area. So tonight I'm going to talk about select subsidies, or what we refer to a little bit more disparagingly as corporate welfare. I'll go over some of the basics, and I'll go over kind of what these programs do and how they've changed over the years, and kind of the disagreement that the Mackinac Center has with them, and which I would assume most people have, people that would be Tea Party or conservatives have with them. The problem is, even if we have all these elected officials, most of who right now, since we have a Republican-dominated legislature, would say they're conservatives, almost all these programs I'm going to talk about were passed nearly unanimously, if not unanimously, in the legislature. So what you have is a lot of politicians telling you that they believe in the free market, and they believe in not picking winners and losers, and all these principles, which should be very important, as they talked about in the opening video, which was very good. And yet they're going and they're not voting like that when they get to office. So if you're a Tea Party group, and I noticed you were going to talk about some candidates and things like that, this is a really important issue to ask people, because on a lot of issues, the Republicans kind of vote together, and the Democrats kind of vote together, but on an issue of select subsidies, there's unfortunately not very much difference between the parties. And so I'm going to kind of talk about some of those programs, help educate you on what they do, and maybe some questions you can ask your legislatures, or just some things to better understand it, because the problem is these are very, very complicated, and the more complicated an issue is, the more legislators can kind of, I'm sure if you've had them in the room, they can talk and try to explain, and they can make these things that are not very good sound very good to people. So in general, what am I talking about? The state of Michigan has a series of programs where in Michigan it's called the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, or the MEDC. And basically what that does in the state is they give certain companies tax breaks and outright subsidies. So under Governor Granholm, a lot of this was a lot of the green programs you heard about. So we had some pretty big failures, which I'm going to talk about, but they would take money from the Treasury, from taxpayers, and they would give it to these companies. And they would speculate on all sorts of different areas. And so it was essentially bureaucrats, members of this, and they would hand out this money. That's continued under Governor Snyder. It's continued in a little bit different of a way, but it is continued on. So the Mackinac Center, which is a free market think tank, which a lot of you know, we oppose these. We're actually, I would say, the main opposition here in the state, especially when it's something that both parties do. And we've been opposed to this for 20 years, and a lot of it started under Governor Engler and through Governor Granholm and through Governor Snyder, and every step of the way we've been opposed to it, and we do a lot on these programs. So the three main reasons to oppose it is one, it's central planning. So it's taking money from the whole group of taxpayers and giving it to legislators and bureaucrats and them giving it out to select companies. And of course, it's not that they're giving it to random companies. You know, the local mom and pop shop and Main Street Lapeer is not getting, you know, these programs. They're giving it to a lot of the big companies, a lot of the ones that are more politically connected, the groups that are tend to be favored. So under Governor Granholm, she really favored a lot of these green companies, a lot of these battery makers, and so those are ones that were picked. It was not picked just randomly, or it wasn't picked totally based on merit. It was picked on what these people like, and unfortunately a lot of times what boards they sit on with people and things like that. So that's a very inefficient way. We don't believe in central planning. We don't believe that that's a good way, an efficient way to run an economy. So that's the first reason. The second reason is the MEDC is a bloated bureaucracy. 52 of the employees alone make over $100,000 a year, and that's just those 52. There's many other 100 more people. So you have hundreds of people in order to figure out how to throw this money around to different groups. The third reason is that these MEDC employees do not have this uncanny ability to know what the next best thing is in the country. Our country did not become great because we had a lot of people figuring out in Congress what's the next area of the economy that's going to take off. Oh, this Henry Ford guy seems like he has a good idea. We'll give him money. No, these things happen because the market dictates what is efficient, and that's how you create jobs in the economy. So why do we have these programs? You know, we have Republicans that tell you we're conservative, I believe in free market, and we have Democrats who say, no, we shouldn't help big business with our tax money, but why do they exist and why are they voted on? You know, you see votes on these things like 108 to 2 in the House and 35 to 1 or 36 to 0 in the Senate. The reason we have them is they're not economic development programs, they're political development programs. So if you go and you open up your newspaper, or if you go onto a website, every time that the MEDC is able to give money to some company, there's politicians there, and they're doing the ribbon cutting, and they're shaking hands with the CEO, and the CEO is telling them how great this is. During the Granholm era, they averaged 3 press releases a week on jobs programs. So we had 8 years of Governor Granholm, 3 press releases a week, and we shed hundreds of thousands of jobs. But every time you have a press release, you have 2 or 3 newspaper articles saying, oh my goodness, look at this, we have these new jobs programs going in, and all the while the economy is doing poorly. So it's free advertising for politicians. They get to go and they get to meet with the CEOs and they get to pretend that they're doing something to help the economy, and unfortunately a lot of people don't realize that those things are economically destructive. So first a little bit of a, well not first I guess, I'm pretty well into this, but what do we do? So in the 1980s, these programs started under Governor Blanchard, and they were very small. It's something called the Michigan Strategic Fund, which was supposed to kind of pick new developing areas that maybe they couldn't get private sector backing, and they needed a little tax money, and maybe that would take off. But it wasn't a very big part of the economy. Under Governor Engler, unfortunately, who was, of course, Republican, and a pretty conservative Republican on a lot of issues, he expanded this. And then under Governor Granholm, this got shot to the stratosphere. Under Governor Engler, this was a fairly significant program, and at the time, the MEDC was run by a guy named Rick Snyder. Well, once Governor Granholm came in, we started spending hundreds of millions of dollars on these programs. So a very large part, or a very significant part of the budget. So, $1 billion or so over a several year period. So it got expanded from the Michigan Strategic Fund to the MEDC to what became and don't worry about all these different, programs, but the general is that it's under the MEDC and then the MEGA program. Governor Snyder changed things a little bit. The problem with the way Governor Granholm ran things was, what she would say is, we create this entity and go spend whatever money you want. So what happened is, they would say, okay, we're going to give you all this incentive money. So all these businesses out there, you all have to pay taxes, and these few businesses, you don't have to pay taxes. Well, the problem with that is they wouldn't have to pay taxes over a long period of time. So it kind of pushed the can down the road, where all these other businesses were paying more in taxes and their competitors were able to get out without paying taxes. And then some of the programs, they were taking money and actually subsidizing businesses. So we had a series of battery plants around the state that she was talking about, and some were getting tens of millions of dollars, and we were having huge failures from these. So under Governor Granholm, we had all kinds of money coming out of the Treasury, and they weren't budgeting for it, and so we had this budget crisis every couple years. Now, Governor Snyder has gotten rid of some very good things. So Governor Granholm, they would talk about indirect jobs. So they would say, this is going to create 5 jobs, but 30 indirect jobs. And indirect jobs could be anything. Somebody drops $10 on the street, that could be 2 indirect jobs, because that $10 turns into, somebody spends it at this store and that gets spent somewhere. So they're very, very hard to measure. Most economists don't like to use that, but it allows our former governor to say, look at all these good things that I'm doing, even if they weren't doing them. So at least under Governor Snyder for the program, they at least budget the money. They say, we're gonna give this program $200 million or $300 million, so it's at least in the budget. That doesn't make it a good thing, of course, but at least we know how much money it is. So there has been, what does the scholarly research say? Now this is kind of the boring part, but I'll try to make it a little bit interesting. There are 4 studies that have been done on these programs. 2 of them have been done by the Mackinac Center. Our first 2005 study found that there was no impact on job creation from these programs, which is fairly surprising, because you would think, if you took this amount of money, there at least be some jobs would be created. What we found was, for every $123,000 spent, they did create 1 construction job, but that job disappeared within 2 years. So very poor return on investment. In 2009, we did another study, and what we found was that for every $1 million in tax credits, we actually lost 83 jobs for every million. And the reason for that is, you're taking this money doesn't come out of thin air, it comes from somewhere. So you're taxing some firms higher to give to other firms, and under our former governor, that was very highly speculative things, a lot of windmill companies and green companies. So you're taking money from productive companies and giving them to non-productive ones, and of course, perhaps not surprisingly, you lose jobs. But it's not just the Mackinac Center. There's the Anderson Economic Group, which is in Lansing, which is a bipartisan group. They did a study which was, believe it or not, funded by the Michigan Education Association. So the MEA, the state's largest teachers union, they funded a study with Anderson Economic Group, obviously a group very much on the left, and what they found was that these 2 programs cost the state $25,000 and $85 million in 25,000 jobs and $85 million in revenue every year. So you can see, this isn't just, these conservatives hate it and these liberals love it. The studies done on this show that they are not good. And then another left-wing group called the Upjohn Institute, which is in Kalamazoo, they did a study, and they did the most positive study on this, which was you got 1,600 jobs a year out of this program, but even that, for the amount that you paid for this, the hundreds of millions of dollars, that's not very much. How many jobs could that have been created if we'd cut taxes, cut income taxes or business taxes? So I'll go over some of the direct failings, and some of these you might have heard of. For example, back in 2008, the MEDC offered a refundable tax credit to a convicted felon, a guy named Richard Short. This was a guy who had embezzled money from different people. He couldn't get a credit card in the state because he'd been convicted in the past, but he was able to get up on stage with Governor Granholm, who said that this guy's company, he got a $9.1 million subsidy deal that they approved him for, and then, of course, once they found out he was a convicted felon, they pulled it back. But somehow this guy couldn't get a credit card here in the state, but he went through the process and was approved for tax incentives here in Michigan. The Auditor General in the state has repeatedly criticized the MEDC because they're not very transparent. The main problem from the Mackinac Center standpoint, we have to go through a lot of trouble to figure out, because they have all these job promises, but we want to know how many did you actually have, and it's very hard to get that information. They don't check on the jobs. They just say they're going to create this many jobs, and they don't check on them later. So the Auditor General has criticized them several times. The CEO, the former CEO of the MEDC, acknowledged that for the first 10 years of the program, they never even did an audit of it. So they were really spending this money, and they had no idea where it was going. Under Governor Granholm, as I said, a lot of these were these green job companies. 4 of the 8 largest green failures in the nation, so we've heard of Solyndra and companies like that. Well, 4 of the top 8 were in Michigan, so half of the largest failures. And in each of these got money from the MEDC. So if you're a taxpayer in the state, you paid money to these companies. One was Azure Dynamics, which was in Oak Park, which was supposed to create all these jobs that went bankrupt 2 years ago. Evergreen Solar, which is up in my neck of the woods in Midland, Michigan. Unsurprisingly, that went bankrupt. A123 Systems, which was supposed to advance hybrid electric vehicles plant. They were supposed to create 850 jobs over 5 years. The company went bankrupt. That was last year. The United Solar Ovonics, which had a few different plants, they were supposed to create 700 jobs. They went bankrupt 2 years ago. LG Chem, another battery plant, they were offered up to $125 million in incentives. There were no jobs. There was a federal investigation because the few jobs that they had, the workers were playing cards and things like that because they had no work to do. There just wasn't a market for the product that they were trying to make. There's a company called Mascoma Corporation, which was supposed to do a biofuel plant up in the UP. They were supposed to do 70 jobs. They were promised up to $120 million. There's no plant, there's no jobs, and et cetera. So this story happens again and again and again. And just remember, like I said, these MEDC programs are voted on and approved almost unanimously by Democrats, by Republicans, by both parties. So consider that the whole time that we're talking about this. Under the MEDC, our film subsidy program here in Michigan falls under that. Who's heard of this? Who knows what's, so, okay, good. That's why I like talking to Tea Party groups, because they always know what's going on. So right now in Michigan, we subsidize films coming into the state. That sounds like a great thing. Unfortunately, it's very economically destructive. So under Governor Granholm, this was an unlimited program. So they approved all kinds of movies all over the place anytime they could. Now, to his credit, Governor Snyder is opposed to this. He wants to end this program. We spend about $50 million a year on it. Under Governor Granholm, we were spending up to $150 million a year. So he's tried to cut it, but the House, the Republican-controlled House here in Michigan, did vote to end this program. But the Senate here in Michigan has voted to continue it, and they've pushed to keep it in the budget every year. This program started in 2008. It was approved a combined 145 to 1. So almost unanimously, one senator voted against it, Nancy Cassis, who represented Novi. So unless you live in Novi, your representatives, both of them, Senate and House, voted for this program at the time. We gave $40 million for the film Oz, which was filmed. That cost $8 a taxpayer, so if you didn't see that movie, you should have seen it for free, because $8 is about what you'd pay for a movie ticket. I tried to do it. They did not let me in, unfortunately. We're filming the Batman Superman movie here next year in Detroit. That's great. I love superhero movies. Unfortunately, one of the categories under the Michigan Film Incentive Program is housing. So you will very likely be paying for Ben Affleck's house this summer. So, philosophically, the question, and I ask my friends who are liberal on this, does it really make sense that I should pay money in taxes so they can subsidize Ben Affleck coming to live in Michigan for a few months? That does not make any sense economically. Well, you're probably going to be doing it. The Senate Fiscal Agency in 2008 or for the year 2010-11, said this program returns 11%. That is, we spent $125 million and we got $13 million back. So a huge loss for taxpayers. There's a lot of individual problems with this program. Allen Park paid $40 million. They wanted to start a film studio down in Allen Park. They put up $40 million because a guy came in and said, I'm going to create 3,000 jobs here in Allen Park. And the governor backed the program, the legislature backed the program. The studio went bankrupt. Allen Park, which had an emergency manager because of all this money that they put up, their police, they had to lay off police and firemen. They had to lay off a lot of basic services because of this. So, you know, it's funny, you know, it's kind of silly how crazy this is, and you know, it's something, you know, we kind of always debate in theory, but for the people in Allen Park, this is real pain. I mean, they lost police and firemen, people got laid off from their job because of a program which, in retrospect, seems so silly that you would promise this amount of stuff. So that Allen Park is going to be on the hook for almost $100 million, and that's a city of about 25,000 people. That's a major, major expense. For the film Oz that I talked about, that was filmed at the Michigan Motion Pictures Studios, which is in Pontiac. This studio, there was a deal. They wanted to open the studio, and so Governor Granholm, they needed to back it. So they had some investors into it, and they need to back it with a certain amount of money to get the loan. Well, they backed it with the pension system here in Michigan, and the studio failed. It missed payments on there. So if you're a public employee here in Michigan, if you're a teacher, or if you work for the state, your pension system has paid almost $2 million so far to this program because that was the deal that they drew up. So really, should we be rating the teacher pensions to pay for something, this kind of program? I would say no. And my favorite story, in terms of my least favorite overall, and something that seems totally outrageous, Michigan, Michael Moore, a few years ago, 4 years ago now, did a film called Capitalism, a Love Story, which was kind of a joke for him. And it was an anti-capitalism film, but the actual basic idea of the film, I saw it. I did a review for the Mackinac Center. It was really taking on this cronyism idea. So he was saying, why are we bailing out big banks and things like that? And he had kind of socialist spin on it. But the thesis of his film was, why do all these big players that are connected with government get all these special deals? Well, Michael Moore got $840,000 from Michigan taxpayers to do that film. So, you know, next time, you know, I have a hard time anytime I read something with Michael Moore or see one of his movies, knowing that he tried to get up $1 million from taxpayers, and we actually gave him money to do that film. So is that something really we should be spending taxpayer money on? So that's a major part of this program, and I would say if you have people running for office here, they need to explain to you, why should we be spending $50 million on this? Why should we be spending $300 million on other programs when you're trying to tell me that we need to raise our gas taxes to pay for the roads? Why are we not spending that money? If we ended our film subsidy program, which nobody thinks, you know, that there are no independent economists who think film subsidy programs are a good idea. The only studies that come out supporting these things are paid for by the film industry. And that's, you know, no conservatives like it, no liberals like it. Now, a lot of left-leaning economists will say we should spend that money on all these other goofy things. But they will tell you that this is not a good way to spend our money. So if your politician's coming in and telling you we need to continue this program, well, why is that more important than the 5 million potholes that we could fill if we ended the film subsidy program? So now into just a few of the numbers. We currently, right now in the state, we spend about $850 million on select subsidy programs. If you add in everything, we're getting close to $1 billion. So what could we better spend that money on? That's the question it should ask. Should it go to a tax cut so taxpayers could have more of it? Should we spend it on things like roads, which is what everyone's talking about right now? Because that would totally take care of our road problem. So why should we be spending $850 or so million on these programs? The main thing to understand is, and especially whenever you're reading a newspaper article where they're talking about, here's all the jobs that we're creating, these are a drop in the bucket. The best way to put it is, every year, Michigan loses about 800,000 jobs. We gain about 800,000 also. We always want to gain more than we lose. But the point is, when the MEDC is saying, you know, we're 50 jobs here, 50 jobs there over the year, that is not a large part of the economy. And the better way to spend that money is to let taxpayers keep more of their own money, have a level playing field for taxes, don't give anyone special favors, and let the free market kind of reign and do its thing. And that's the best way to kind of run these programs. So with that, I don't know how much of my time I used, but that's kind of the basics of what I talked about. I'm glad to take any questions. I know some of these, it's very confusing, and I try to simplify it kind of as best I can, but that's my overall points, and I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, if anybody has a question.
Hi, I'm Carl from Otter Lake. You mentioned Nancy Cassis, and she's no longer, I believe, in the legislature. Are there any people currently serving that are, have on the record opposed to this?
Yeah, you can go look at, the House voted on this. So one of the issues with this is it's no longer like, when they started the program in 2008, it was a bill. Should we spend an unlimited amount on film subsidy programs? So we have everyone on the record. The way it works now is they've wrapped it into the overall budget. So what happened is you have to look at the budget, and I've done a few articles on this, and so you can talk to different representatives and get their opinion on this, but they don't have like a vote on the record. So, but what happened was the House submitted a budget before last year, and they cut the program. They said, well, we'll use it spending on all these other areas. And then what happened was the Senate just said, no, we want $100 million for it, and they compromised and they did $50 million. So there's not really a way to get their exact vote on it unless you actually just ask them. But basically, the House of Representatives, the Republicans are against it right now, but the Senate Republicans, almost all of them, continue to support it. Because the Senate Republicans have a 26-12 majority. So if even 6 or 7 of these guys disliked it, it would probably be something that they could get rid of, or at least pale back a little bit.
Hello, Jarrett.
Yeah.
Given that these programs are so bad, why is it that virtually every state in the union has a program like this where they try to entice companies to open up businesses in their states?
Yeah, so most states have it. To the extent that they have it, it's very different. I mean, some of them, they don't do anything at the state level, they'll do it at the local level or something like that. But the main reason is it makes politicians look good. I mean, even for something where what's worried a lot of people in Michigan is these auto plants opening up in the South, and they talk about that a little bit. But the thing to just understand is politicians like to look good. They like the free advertising that comes with doing this. But there's a lot of national groups that look at this too, besides just the Mackinac Center. I mean, we focus a lot just on Michigan, what these things are. But the national groups that look at this also, they find that these programs are very inefficient. There's a consensus among economists. This isn't even like a conservative versus liberal thing. It's a consensus among economists that doing select subsidy programs do not work very well. And to the extent that we think they work, it's mostly just because some big name employer moved somewhere. But even for those, you're talking about a few hundred jobs out of, like I said, hundreds of thousands of jobs that are created and destroyed every year. I mean, I don't really have a good answer other than the politicians like to have all these press releases and things like that, but there's not really a good reason to continue doing them. I've convinced you all?
Yeah, Ron Hughes. I got a question about, do you know anything about the part-time legislature petitions that's going around, and you got any comments on that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and if you have other questions on other legislative issues, I'm happy to take those. Yeah, so they're trying to get the part-time, which would go to a part-time legislature, cut the pay of the legislature, and limit the number of staffers they have. They need to collect a certain amount of signatures. They have 90 days to do it from whenever they first submitted the petition, which I don't know the exact date. The Mackinac Center does not have a position on this just because there's so many issues out there. We tend not to get involved in the electoral ones. My opinion on it is because there's a lot of debate. I spoke at another Tea Party group, and they asked me the same question. And they had some people that were supporting it, and they had other people who said, well, I talked to my legislature, and they're worried that the governor will be more powerful, or bureaucrats will be more powerful, or something like that. The way I see it, only 4 states have a full-time legislature like Michigan does, and if a state like Texas can meet up every other year for 60 days and have a much smaller government than we are, you know, there might be arguments against this, but you need to show me. I care about limited government. So if you're going to make an argument to me, you need to show me this state has a part-time legislature and look how big their government is. And really, you don't see that. So, I mean, you know, not telling you whether to vote yes or no on it, but at least if people are going to tell you to, you know, my inclination, of course, would be to vote yes, because it does at least cut down government a little bit. But if people are going to tell you vote, you know, you shouldn't vote on it because of these things, make sure you're voting no for the right reasons, which is that it would expand, or government would expand if we don't have it.
Hi, Jarrett. This question is more of a federal thing, I believe, and it's on the census. Some people are starting to get census surveys around now, and you used to get them, they were 10 or 12 questions. Okay, it looks like now they're getting almost book size, and lots of personal questions, and lots of stuff I'm really not sure that even the Census Bureau should be asking. And in there someplace, there's a penalty that if you don't answer them, of criminal actions against that. Can you help or understand what Mackinac Center's issue is on that, or what their feeling is on that?
Honestly, we don't have any position, and it's just not something I know much about, so I'm not real comfortable responding to it, but I definitely have to look more into it, but I don't know the answer, sorry.
So what is one to do? What is somebody here supposed to do to help dismantle the corruption, to somehow turn this thing back on its head and use our money for what it should be used for?
That's a great question. So I mentioned this a little bit at the beginning, but it's great that we're all involved in federal issues, and those are important in setting up the thing with Candace Miller. That's great. Anytime you can talk to elected politicians. But like I said, the most power that you have as a group is, and I don't know who the state rep that covers this area is, but if you can get meetings with those people, it's more along the lines of, this is an issue we're watching. Because in 2008, this was pre-Tea Party, when they're talking about a film subsidy program, no one knew what it was. They just thought, oh, this seems kind of a good idea, and there's no groups out there fighting it or something like that. So my advice would be, on some of these issues, understand what you're talking about, which we have a lot of resources at the Mackinac Center, and just let your rep know that there's an eye on it. And more importantly, when you're talking about Republican primary candidates who are going to come, they go to a lot of Tea Party groups and want you to support them, specifically ask on this issue. So it can be very simple. Should the government pick winners and losers in the marketplace by subsidies or tax rebates? That's a pretty simple question. And if they say yes, they need to really explain to you why it is. Most of them are going to say no. But if they say no, the most you can do is get people on record opposing these types of programs, because then when they go down to Lansing and lobbyists are talking to them, they know, I'm on record, I said I don't support these programs, and that's what I'm going to go do going forward. But in economics, there's something called public choice theory. So the idea of that is that we always wonder, why does government expand so much? Why do we have all these silly things that most people disagree with? Well, not to make it too complicated, but public choice theory is the idea that if you polled everyone in the state and said, should the government be giving select tax subsidies to certain companies? They'd say no. I bet 75%, 80% of people would say no. So why do we have these? The reason is because the people who benefit from them, it is worth their time. If you're getting $40 million for, to come film Oz here, well, it's worth it to spend $30 million lobbying people. It's probably not worth everyone here to spend, it costs you a few dollars each. It's not worth you to all raise $30 million opposing it. So the basic example is just get them on record, opposing it from the beginning and understand that this is why lobbyists have a lot of power, because they have a lot of time and money to spend in order to get your money. So, and of course, elect people with principles, because when you're in a room and somebody's trying to get you to spend money on some program, the only thing that matters is principles, because they can convince you that anything sounds good. They can make it sound like Michigan has better weather than Florida in the wintertime. But if you have the principles and you understand things, then perhaps they'll vote against it.
Okay. Well, we have the opportunity to have representatives and elected officials through here very often, so we'll be sure to ask them a lot of questions.
Oh, and I would add two things. So the one, I know some groups do like a score, not a scorecard, but some groups do surveys of candidates. So they'll come up with like 10 questions for candidates. That's a good thing to do. Especially, just send it out to whoever's running for state rep or state senate in your area. Include a series of questions on it, and this should be one of them. Have them on record. And the other thing, what some very good Tea Party groups do is they do a scorecard. So the Mackinac Center runs a service called MichiganVotes.org, and we track every vote that your elected official votes on. Well, you, as a Tea Party group, if you go on there, you can say, I want to do a scorecard and of your current elected officials, and you can say, here's the votes we care about. It could be on any issue. It could be from abortion to economic development, anything you want. You can say, here's the 10 issues, and it'll rate those officials for you. It'll say, you can say, I agree with this or I disagree with this, and it'll rate them for you. Well, that's a very good way to let you know that these people, here are the 10 issues we have, not taking the 1,000 votes they take every year, but 10 very important issues to you as a group, and then sending those out to your group, and then you'll know actually how they vote on these different issues. So if you have somebody, one of your leaders, maybe MichiganVotes.org, they allow you and they kind of walk you through how to do that. So thanks for having me. I'll stick around a little bit, and if you have other questions, feel free to come up.